I express my warm welcome to Professor Iraj Rathnayake, Professor in Tourism, Department of Tourism Management, Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. He is the resource person for today's session on designing with purpose, developing research proposals for qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method studies. Participants, mainly our undergraduates from the Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa, Sri Lanka. Once again, I extend a warm welcome to all of you and wish you a productive and enlightening session. Thank you very much. So now I would like to introduce the main speaker of today's session, and it's a great pleasure for me to announce him. Let me allow reading his great profile. Professor Iraj Rathnayake is a professor in tourism with more than 2 decades of successful academic career. So he obtained his PhD from the Southern University of Malaysia in tourism planning and served as the head of the Department of Tourism Management and the founder, Dean of the Faculty of Graduate Studies at Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. His literary presentations mainly encompass tourism planning and development. Besides engaging in research and writing, he participates actively in training and consultation projects, including recreational planning, Ayurveda health tourism, wellness facility development, and management. Professor Iraj served in the Standing Committee on Accreditation and Quality Assurance of the Ministry of Higher Education. Currently, he serves as a member of the Board of Ayurvedic Education and Hospitals, and he is also the chairperson of the Ayurvedic Examination Board of the Department of Ayurveda, Sri Lanka. He is a resource person for Ayurveda health tourism at the National Institute of Traditional Medicine, Sri Lanka. So Professor Iraj has a lifelong passion for developing and promoting wellness education in Sri Lanka. So here onward, the platform is yours, sir.
Thank you, Rashmi, for your kind introduction. Actually, I didn't expect that much of detailed introduction about myself. Anyway, let me share my presentation today. Yes. Well, hope you see the presentation.
We can see, sir.
Yes, sir. It's visible. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And once again, good evening to all of you. And it is indeed pleasure to share some of my understanding, knowledge, as well as experience teaching research methodology at undergraduate and postgraduate level. And it is a subject area which I most like to spend much of my time in teaching as well as reading. So therefore, I feel that this opportunity is something that I can personally enjoy with you during this couple of hours to come. Even though you see a slight difference in the title I suggest here with the side title you propose, but nothing much different other than the letters or the words you find in the title itself. But I would like to emphasize something at the very beginning when I say indicative structures of research proposals. So what does this mean? Indicative structures mean so that the things which I am going to discuss with you within next couple of hours are not something very rigid or fixed. So they give you some kind of an indication to develop your research proposal to suit to you, according to your requirement. So most of the undergraduate who are participating in this seminar series, I know that they are at the moment in the process of compiling their research proposals, or maybe some of them they have already completed the task and approaching their research work in the field and so on. And the rest of the title, as it says, under quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method inquiries. So it means that when you're developing a research proposals, you have to make sure that you are correctly addressing the certain specialties, special requirements that you have to take into account when you are developing your proposals. Because in any case, you are going to undertake your research either under the quantitative mode of inquiry or qualitative mode of inquiry or mixed methods inquiry. So it means there are some differences that you need to take into account. There are so many similarities, but it is important to understand and address the things which are not similar when it comes to different types of studies. So before we directly move into the topic today, I would like to share some ideas about the basic steps of a research project. So this is what you know very clearly. First, we need to find a research problem, right? And then research problem basically is a broad statement. So as researchers, it is not practically possible to deal with a broad statement. So therefore, what is required is that to break that broad research problem into workable research questions. So that is the idea of formulating research questions. So then, so one can say after formulating research questions, of course, we need to develop research objectives. Well, so these are basic steps, right? So I'm not going to go into detail. So the next major task is to select your research design. So as there are three methodological approaches, by now I know that because this topic has been well covered by one of the professors in the management faculty, if I'm not mistaken, Professor Rangana Shalika. So during that session, I think you have clearly understood that there are a number of different research designs available for researchers to select to undertake their research projects. And then once you complete the tasks that are relevant to complete the research design, so you can execute the other important activities which are in the research process. So after designing your research, you are okay to gather evidence. Once you gather evidence, that is data collection, right? So you can move on to data analysis. So at the end of the data analysis, you have the results. So then as researchers, it is our responsibility to interpret them correctly. So once you have the results, the most important step of the research process is you have to communicate that research results to the intended audience, right? So those are the basic steps of the research process. Hope you are well aware of these steps. So now come to understand the concept of research proposal. Actually, a research proposal is a plan of action, right? So why do we need a plan? Because undertaking a research, we need to complete the task of undertaking a research according to a plan, because it is an activity which is time bound, and it is an activity where we have to employ a certain amount of resources in terms of financial, in terms of time, and also in terms of effort. So therefore, using or utilizing these valuable resources, we are expecting to obtain some usable result. So therefore, working according to a plan from the very beginning when undertaking a research is paramount important. So as a when you develop a research proposal, since it is a plan of action, it describes the scope of your research, aims, and also it clearly explains the step-by-step procedures. So this is important because there are so many steps, and each steps you have to undertake so many different types of activities or actions where you need to complete each and every step of the research process. And in some certain types of research, the researchers can predict, can sense about the expected outcome. So this does not relevant to all types of research and all cases, but still there are situations, particularly when you are doing a quantitative study, there are opportunities where the researchers can predict the potential outcome of their research. So that also can include in the research proposal in such cases. So it's a framework where you put your ideas to be researched, and it has to be well justified. And also you have to provide substantial evidence about the significance of undertaking your research, right? And how and where it is placed in the relevant body of knowledge. So that is identifying the specific literature gap. You are going to locate your study in the existing body of knowledge. And then we have to explain very clearly the steps that you follow when you are employing a particular type of methodology, and also the respective design that you have selected, and also the methods according to your research that you are intended to follow. In addition to that, we also need to mention the resources required, particularly in cases where you are requesting funding facilities in order to undertake your research, right? So you need to provide this information in very detail, and also the time frame, right? So when we are approaching a research project, right? So there is very preliminary activities or actions we used to undertake. We might brainstorm in order to find a research problem and to refine the research problems. please spend some time, and it is mostly a mental process. And also, in most of the activities we undertake, at the very early stage of the research process, we usually employ most of our mental effort. So therefore, we are lacking in writing something about our research ideas. But there are many areas where we need to effectively communicate about our research project. There are various communicative needs. As students undertaking their research projects for examination purposes, they have to first convince their supervisors about their research ideas. If the researcher is trying to access to research grants, in that case, they have the particular researcher has to convince the donor agencies for accessing respective research grants. So likewise, there are many, and in research higher degrees, particularly the candidates, they have to submit a research project, research proposal. Okay, sorry for that interruption. Research proposal in order to secure a placement in a research higher degree program. So in that case, they have to comprehensively submit a research proposal. So as now you know, there are many occasions we have to provide a detailed document, what we call a research proposals. In that case, we are in the process of transforming research ideas into writing. So when you prepare this proposal, it is very important you to understand who is your target audience, right? So in the case of undertaking undergraduate research, there are several individuals who become your target audience, right? So first, your supervisor, and then the examiners, right? So that we need to understand. But it is not always the case. When you undertake research, your audience may be the broader academic community. So that you need to understand when you are developing the research proposal. Okay, so now we'll going to discuss indicative structure research proposals under quantitative mode of inquiry. So it is important to keep in mind. So this is just an indicative structure, right? So when you work with your supervisors, so they might provide substantial contribution to improve, advance your document. So therefore, you better take this as an indicative structure, right? So nothing is fixed, therefore. Okay, so let's start with the title first. And also remember that when we discuss developing research proposals under 3 headings according to the methodological approaches, something that we are going to discuss here is also relevant to other approaches as well. If I am not telling specifically, right? Remember that. Okay, why the title is important, right? So it can be any type of research. The title is important. Why? Because it is the first thing that the reader will see, right? So they will get the idea first about the content or the scope of the research by by looking at the title of the research itself, right? So therefore, the title must be clear, persuasive, and the title must be very engaging, right? Type of title which you can keep the interest of the reader. Even when you go to a bookshop, right? So when you scan through shelves, right? So if you find a book, right? So which captures your uh, attention, right? So then the person will take some time to read at least couple of pages and so on, right? So therefore, keeping a very creative title, actually a very informative title, is actually a skill that you need to develop, right? So it captures the essence of the study. And when you are developing a title for a quantitative study, you have to be accurate and specific, right? It should not be overly general. So overly general title will not help the reader to get a very clear idea, right? So it will remain as ambiguous, right? So that's not the proper way of giving a title. And don't include unnecessary or distracting details in your title. When you develop your title, take some time to improve it by revising it when and where necessary. Okay. And it is always good that you keep a title which is comprehensible to a broader academic readership. And also, it is good if you can engage the reader and create the curiosity in the mind of the reader, right? And there are a lot of arguments among academics. I personally experienced that you cannot keep titles like this and that. So therefore, I have specifically selected some of the titles to show as examples, which you can take them as a specimen to keep a title for a quantitative study. So let's go through some of the examples. The first one, the relationships and mediating effects of employee engagement, an empirical study of managerial employees of Sri Lankan listed companies. So these two authors, they have given their quantitative study this particular title. So this title has two parts. First, the major title and the subtitle. So in the first part of the title, it tells about the variables they are going to study. And the second part of the title clearly explains the empirical context of their study, right? Look at the second title, right? Should defined contribution plan include private equity investments, right? So these researchers, they have developed a title in a form of a question, right? Sometimes I have experienced that some argue that we should not keep titles as questions. So this paper I found in a high-end journal where the authors have given the title of their paper in a form of a question. So now look at the third title as well. Does skilled labor risk matter to suppliers? So this title again has two parts. first part consists of the major part of the title, which is in the form of a question. And in the second part, it talks about the empirical context. Right. So once you complete about the title, so there is a misunderstanding about the title and the problem statement. So there are two things, right? So when you keep a title in your at the proposal stage until you complete your research project, we call that title a working title. So meaning of a working title is that there is a possibility of revising the title according to the scope and the outcome of your research project. So we do not know exactly what is the scope and the outcome of the research project until we complete it, right? So until the last stage of the research process, so we can revisit, or even in between the research steps of the research process, we can revisit and refine the title of any research project. So that's why we call it a working title. So as I mentioned before, the title of a research project and the problem statement are two different, right? So we need a problem to start a research process. So when we present your problem of your study, usually it will take in many different forms. I know that you have already completed those areas in previous sessions. So therefore, I'm not taking too much time explaining these areas. Okay. So if you need additional explanation, you can stop me at any time and ask. You can ask questions, right? Okay. So once you define your research, problem statement, so then you can move on to develop your research questions and or hypothesis. So as I mentioned before, research problem is a broad statement. Therefore, we cannot take it as our point of departure. Actually, we want to move on, right? So with the broad statement, it is not very clear where we need to move on, right? So therefore, this broad statement, now we want to represent it by set of research questions. So therefore, don't ask how many research questions do I need to develop. It depends. You can develop, my advice is you can develop as much as possible research questions, and you do not need to study about all the research questions. So you can select some of the research questions according to the priority, and you can keep some of those research questions without undertaking them in the same study. But you have to report, right? You have to report what questions you take into account and what questions you have not studied. Okay, so it is good if you have research questions, but in some studies, they directly move on to define research objectives. But in our practical setting, it is good after development of the research problem, if you develop research questions, and it is also good if you can develop research hypothesis, but it is not mandatory. If you are strongly backed by theoretical underpinnings, you will be able to come up with a set of hypotheses, but you need to have research questions, right? And then we move on to develop research objectives. So research objectives, when you develop, remember they should be correspond with the research questions, right? So research objectives should be correspond with the research questions. Now, see, in your study, if you have 3 research questions, right? So you will going to have 3 corresponding research objectives, right? It's very clear, very straightforward. And some students, they, they have the practice of uh, keeping a general or broad research objective, something like that, and they keep specific research objectives, right? So I personally, I don't think that it is something that really necessary, right? So keep things simple, right? And it is easy to understandable, right? Once you have set of research questions, so you move on with corresponding research objectives. Having research objectives are important because we are talking about developing a research proposal and it is a plan, right? So in plans, usually you find objectives, right? So we develop a plan to implement, expecting certain results. So these are the objectives we are going to meet, right? So once we meet those objectives, we are in a position to answer the corresponding questions. By answering the corresponding questions clearly and comprehensively, so we will be in a position to understand the problem, right? Nature of the behavior of the phenomenon. Okay. So this is the way we work. Okay. So we move back and forth. So there are certain aspects we need to include in a research proposal in order to provide the justification for undertaking the research. So that is what we call significance of the study, right? So students, they have they are doing this section in various ways by highlighting the importance to the industry and importance to the academia, right? So this significance you can tell in many different ways, right? It doesn't matter. So you are free to provide whatever the necessary information which you can justify undertaking your research project, right? So in that case, you can highlight the potential benefits of this study, right? And if you are applying for research grants, the donor agencies will specifically look into the detailedness of this section. So therefore, depending on your audience, the target audience, you have to comprehensively address to these sections in very detail. So in the literature, in research proposal development stage, right? So we need to undertake preliminary literature review in order to showcase how we are going to position our research in the existing body of knowledge. So therefore, this is going to be a preliminary literature review, right? So the literature review means collecting, evaluating, and analyzing the literature relevant to our study area. Okay. In quantitative studies, this is another important aspect which you cannot neglect or avoid. So the conceptualization and operationalization. Unlike in other studies means qualitative studies, where the conceptualization take place in the latter part of the qualitative studies, while the conceptualization in quantitative studies are taking in the initial stage, right? So the conceptualization is the process of specifying what we mean when we use particular terms, concepts, right? So it is the reverse process of conception, right? So there is a process of developing concepts, right? So we start with the conception, right? And then we cannot, because when we involve in the process of conception, right? So it is not practical to use the outcome of the process of conception everywhere. So therefore, to represent the whole idea of conception, we replace or we develop concepts, right? So when we say conceptualization, and it becomes the reverse process of conception. Once you conceptualize the concepts that you are going to deal with or undertake within your study, right? So you need to operationalize, right? So operationalization means the development of specific research procedures that will result in empirical observations representing the concepts. So in the operationalization is where you are going to technically define your variables, how to measure them, right? So that information you need to include in this section. So this is a very important section where your supervisors will always look into looking very seriously, unless they will not give you a green light to go ahead with your quantitative study, right? For this, you have to utilize existing literature, because in a study, we are not going to uh, do everything by our own, right? And it is not advisable to develop measurements by your own, because we have no guarantee about the validity and reliability of those instruments. So therefore, you need to scan through the relevant literature in order to identify the set of relevant indicators uh, to, to utilize for your study. So the next section, you have to elaborate the methodological selection. Why you have selected the quantitative methodology as appropriate to your research, because there are two more methodological approaches where you are leaving behind. So therefore, over the qualitative and mixed methodologies, when you are selecting the quantitative methodology for undertaking your study, you must provide a adequate justification. And next, we want to elaborate on the particular research design we are going to select, right? So in every a step of the research process where you have to deal with more than one type of things, right? There you need to provide adequate justification, right? So when selecting a research design for a quantitative study is a very straightforward compared to qualitative studies. As you see here, there are few designs available, such as experimental, quasi-experimental, survey, correlational, and evaluation, right? So it's very easy, because when you go through the characteristics of these designs, where and also when and where these designs can be applicable successfully, so you will be able to find the most suitable design out of this list. So once you select your particular design to undertake, give a complete description about the design, its process, and other elements of the design, such as there are many elements you find when you complete this section, which include site selection rationale, right? So when you're undertaking a research, you have to select your research site, right? So why do you select that? Now, for example, if you're undertaking your research uh, by selecting the students who are studying in the 4th year in the Faculty of Management Studies, right? So why Sabaragamuwa University Management Faculty and the 4th year? So the site selection, why it is not otherwise, right? So therefore, you have to write about your site selection rationale. So site selection may be an organization, institution, or maybe a group of individuals, or maybe a community, right? So it can be any of those, right? And then you have to define your population and the sample selection, right? So there are statistical measures to select representative sample in quantitative studies, right? So you have to explain everything in detail. What is your sampling strategy and how you are going to select the items of the sample from the population. And you need to elaborate at this stage how you are going to access to the research site and the respondents. And I always advise to my students, you have to stop doing all other activities relevant to your research project until you clear about your access to the research site and the respondents. Don't move forward unless you are clear about this stage. Because I personally have a lot of experiences about students who have completed their research proposals, but when the time of data collection, they are not getting they are not able to get clear access to the research site and the respondent. Some organizations, they do not like to give permission officially, so therefore no research could be conducted if we could not get clear access to the research site and the respondents. And some information they do not divulge to a third party. So therefore, if you cannot collect the relevant data, there again you cannot undertake the study. So therefore, at this stage, make sure that you have addressed all the necessary requirements in order to obtain clear access to your research site, right? So if you are dealing with outside organizations, right, so you have to clearly write to them officially, telling about your study with a supportive letter from the training unit of the Faculty of Management Studies, in order to obtain the official approval. So when you talk about the access, it's not always official or formal. There can be personal access as well. So I'm not going to talk in detail, but once I send this PPT to you, you can go through. So both types of accesses consist of different steps, right? So there you need to do certain things in the pre-entry, and there are certain things you need to undertake, how you are going to perform during the field work, and also you need to do certain things after the field work. And there may be situations where you need to get back to the same research site or to the respondents in order to gather more information or more data or additional data. So therefore, you may use either access depending on your requirement and the possibility, right? But make sure that at this stage you are well okay with that, right? Before proceed further. And then the sources of data, right? When you mention the sources of data, please make sure that you're supposed to provide only the sources of data that you are going to use in your study. So I know that academics have seen in many cases in your documents, the students used to write secondary sources of data and the primary sources of data. First, cross-check whether there is a possibility of using secondary sources of data, right? So once you develop your research questions and the corresponding objectives, right? So go through each and every objective in your research research proposal and try to find out what type of data you need and from what sources you going to get those data. First, cross-check whether secondary data are available or not. If secondary data are not available, so then you have to cross-check how you are going to collect primary data, right? So if you are not going to use secondary data, don't write about anything about secondary data. But we used to see in your documents, in most cases, students, they have the habit of writing such as journals, books, magazines, websites, etc., etc. So those are very generic type of sources where you can't find data. I agree. Those can be considered as sources of data. But in your case, you have to be very specific, and this is where you have to give the information about the names of those databases and the respective affiliation, right? So because secondary data are available with institutions and individuals under their ownership. So therefore, if you are using, you have to clearly state these are the databases I am going to use, right? So for example, Columbus Stocks Exchange data on this particular subject, right? From this date to that date, right? So the period, affiliation, and also the name of the data set that you are using, right? It can be meteorological data, it can be financial data of a institution, right? It doesn't matter, right? If you are using them, you have to provide that information. But don't write unnecessarily just to mention, because when you go through the documents available in the library written by your senior colleagues, right? So they used to write like websites, journals, magazines, newspapers, right? So don't put that type of information. That's not necessary and that's not right, okay? And then once you okay with the sources of data, whether they are secondary or primary, right? So then you have to highlight the method or methods of data collection and what are the instruments or techniques that you are going to use, right? So in some cases, there may be some methodological limitations and methodological significance, right? So you are going to use this quantitative methodology maybe for the very first time in this kind of a study, right? So this can be same in other type of research approaches as well, right? So right through the literature, you find these type of studies being conducted in quantitative mode of inquiry, but you can think of applying a novel methodological approach, undertaking or replicating a same type of study, justifying your methodological approach is innovative, right? So if that is your case, may not be always your case, but if that is your case, you can write about it as well, right? And then how you are going to analyze your data, right? Since you are going to collect numerical data, right, using data collection tools. So then you are about to write here how you are going to analyze and why these strategies are appropriate to analyze your data and so on, right? So quantitative studies are usually a predictive type, right? So there is a much possibility of predicting about the results. So therefore, you can have a section called expected outcome of the research. And this is particularly important, similar to the significance of the study. If you are particularly requesting research grants, right? So the donors, they will go through these sections in very detail about in order to understand the outcome of your research. And then there are some other sections which you need to include in your proposals, but at the very beginning, this section may not be comprehensively written because you experience those limitations while you are undertaking subsequent steps of the research project. But at the initial stage, there may be situations where you can experience or come across certain limitations. If so, you can have a section in your research proposal at the very beginning. That's why I have mentioned if any, right? So if you do not have any limitations at the very beginning, so don't leave a section. Don't write anything unnecessary. So you can omit this section, right? So the limitations, you need to understand this very clearly. The limitations are the influences that the researcher cannot control. As the researcher, there are certain things which you can control during the research process. They are well under your control, but there are certain things beyond your control, right? So those but still you are capable of undertaking the research, but the readers or the examiners, they clearly need to know and understand under which limitations you have carried out your study, right? So there can be shortcomings, conditions, or influences that cannot be controlled by the researcher and place restrictions on your methodology and conclusions. So therefore, it is important. So examiners will go through these sections and they will realize, understand the limitations that you have experienced, right? Here, undertaking your study, right? For example, what are the limitations that you experience during your analysis, right? And nature of self-reporting, instruments you utilized, right? About the sample applicability of specific requirement in terms of the quality, quantity, and other specific requirement that you are particularly looking at the very beginning, but you fail to meet, right? If there were some of those reasons, so this is the section that you need to include that detail, right? And also the time constraint. But the students, when they write the limitations of the study, they mistakenly understand the concept here. So they used to write that within 3 months of time, it is not possible to complete a study of this nature or something like that, right? So it is not the idea here. Time constraints may be something, as you see in this example, impact of the seasonality on data collection and not the time given to complete the study, right? So now assume that you are going to collect uh, data about some variables relating to the parameters of the soil conditions, right? So against the during the rainy season, right? So the if you expect to observe during a certain period, but if you did not get the expected rainfall, right, precipitation, right, so you can report that under this rainfall I made these observations and so on. And this is the result from the study subject to these limitations. So therefore don't write about the time given to complete your study. So that is not something relevant here. The time constraint means anything that you struggle to complete complete your study, which you cannot control, something like seasonality, right? And some researchers then they have to define the boundaries of their studies, right? So because when you are defining the scope of your study, right? So you have to avoid, you have to keep something aside without studying, right? So that is how we usually define the scope of the studies, right? So these set boundaries we call delimitations, right? So delimitations are, in other words, the things that you are not doing, right? So why you have chosen not to do them, right? Maybe as initially if you have decided, but later you decided not to do them. Or maybe the theories you have selected, but you have not applied them in the study, right? The literature you have surveyed but not reviewed, right? So maybe the literature relevant to a certain period of time, right? And the literature uh, outside of that particular period, but still relevant, but you can define. So this is the period of the literature that I have reviewed for the purpose of my study. But you cannot just tell like that. You have to tell why you have not taken into account the other literature relevant to the study, right? Outside that particular period. Okay. It can be something relevant to the population. It can be something relevant to the methodological procedures. So whatever the boundaries you are setting, right? If you are doing something like that, you're supposed to report them in very detail, right? So these two sections you can complete after compiling your research what do you call findings, right? Maybe at the initial stage you can provide some amount of information under these two headings, such as limitations of the study, delimitations of the study. So in research, we're supposed to study the social world. And in the social world, we usually find individuals, groups, and institutions, right? And even when we study institutions, sometimes we closely observe, monitor, we collect data from individuals again, right? So therefore, such data that we need to gather may be sensitive to the respondents. So therefore, we need to address to the ethical issues of the study within its purview. Right, so your supervisors will advise. Unfortunately, we are not very serious about this aspect when we are particularly undertaking undergraduate research, maybe due to the massive volume of studies we need to complete within a short period of time. But it's not an excuse, because addressing to the ethical issues and undertaking your research is very important. Assume that you are collecting data from school children, for example, right? So it's a very serious issue, that it's a very sensitive area where you have to need ethical consideration. Or maybe you are collecting data from patients in undertaking treatments in a hospital, for example, right? So in such cases, when you are selecting human subjects for collecting data, uh, so you have to be very uh, sensitive to those aspects. So how would you meet these ethical considerations? So there is a structure and a process established within higher educational institutions. I am providing this information for you. Uh, so you have to request the ethical clearance from the committee which is established in higher educational institutes. Even in Sabaragamuwa University, there is a committee, right? So with the relevant information, there is an application. With the application, you have to provide the detailed information about your research. You can submit your research proposal as well as the instruments that you are going to collect data from the human subject, right? So they will particularly go through the objectives of your study and as well as the instruments that you are going to use to collect data, how you have developed it, what is the what content in that, and whether if they are going to violate any ethical considerations or not. If there is nothing to revise, so they will give you the green light. If there is something need to be revised, so then they will inform you to do accordingly, right? So after that, you will be able to get the ethical clearance from the ethical clearance committee. If you are particularly targeting a high-end journal publication, so those journals are particularly requesting to submit the ethical clearance report obtained by the respective higher educational institute along with your paper. Unless they will not accept your paper. And then you can put the details about the resources required, such as the equipment, the softwares that you are going to use, other type of supplies, with all the financial figures. Particularly, this section is important if you are asking for a research budget, right? So because you need to convert the resources into financial terms to give a clear indication about the project cost. Okay. And the time frame, as you all know, students are very good in providing this information by using a Gantt chart. But you have to make sure that you are stick to all the way you follow the time frame, right? And the references as usual, because you have provided your contents of your literature review. So therefore, you need to provide the references. In that case, references we expect from you according to the APA recommended citing style, right? So always, I know that the students are now very good in using computer assisted software in making their references, a bibliographic list. right? So even at this stage, you can provide bibliographic references. The references are the literature that you have cited in your document, but there may be additional readings that you have already you have done. You can provide that information under the bibliographic references, right? So if there are any additional information, so supplementary material, right, that is not an essential part of the main part of your research proposal, but if you think that they are helpful in providing more comprehensive understanding, you can provide, you can organize and provide them under appendices, right? So when you provide those materials in appendixes, make sure that you are going to number them accordingly, right? Like appendix A, B, C, and so on, or appendix 1, 2, 3, and so on, right? And also you have to make particular reference to those appendix in the main text. Otherwise, don't put appendices for the sake of providing additional information. So then the reader, while the reader is reading the document, the main section of the document, so then they will easily pick the reference, the particular appendix number, and find the particular appendix in the appendix section directly, right? So this link must be well maintained. Otherwise, don't unnecessarily add any information in the document, right? Okay, so that's it. That's the indicative structure of the quantitative research proposals, right? So be very creative and flexible, right? You can discuss with your supervisors and make necessary adjustments, right? So, and even the order you can change slightly, not the major ones, but other topics you can change the order in the structure according to your own interest, right? But make sure that your document at the end going to be a very comprehensive and very sound one, right? Right. So with that, we now move on to the qualitative research proposals, and this is again an indicative structure, right? And when it comes to qualitative studies, following a particular structure is extremely difficult, right? So you can it depends on the nature of your study. Your study will take a unique structure, right? So that will entirely different from one study to another, right? Okay, so let's move on. Right, so we start always with the title, right? So here we need to give a creative title, right? So your creativity is going to play a big role here, right? So when you compare to giving a title to a quantitative study, I'm not undermining the effort of the quantitative researchers in that case, but when it comes to qualitative research, giving a creative title is something that we are really expecting, right? So these are some of the examples I have selected for you to give an idea of how to present a title or how to keep a title for a qualitative study. So this one, it talks about cognitive representations of AIDS. That's the first part of the title, the major title, and the subtitle. There's a second part, a phenomenological study, right? So these researchers, they investigated the cognitive representations of AIDS patients, right? How they experience, the live experience of being an AIDS positive patient, right? And look at this title, right? So this is from one of educational research, adequate schools and inadequate education. So see how creative the title is, right? So this researcher critiquing on, right? So the adequacy of the schools, but the question is the pressing or stressing question is, even though we have adequate schools, there's a question about the adequacy of the delivery of the education, right? So we have put, so this is not about our country, right? So it's a different country. They have put adequate effort to put the necessary infrastructure in place, but they have not very serious about the delivery, right? So that's always matters. So therefore, but the first part of the title, which is the major title, does not tells us the whole scope of the study, right? So the second title means the subtitle tells the specific scope of the study. See how creative the life history of a sneaky kid, right? Life history of a sneaky kid. And in the first and the second title, when you go to the subtitle, you see the particular type of design selected by the researcher or researchers, right? In the first title, it's a phenomenological study, right? So it is good if you can keep the type of the design you applied in your research, undertaking your qualitative study in the titles itself, right? But it is not always the case. So in the second one, the life history of a sneaky kid. Actually, it's a narrative study. There are different forms of narrative study where the life history is one of sub types of narrative studies, right? And this is Steve Jobs, right, by Walter Isaacson, written in 2011. I know everybody knows about this gentleman who does not need any introduction, right? So this is a very straightforward, because when you say Steve Jobs, the title does not require any other explanation, right? That's it, right? And take this one, Out of Bondage. That's the first part of the title. The second part of the title is The Tondaman Story by T. Sabaragamuwa. Right? So last two studies are biographies, right? Steve Jobs and the Out of Bondage, The Tondaman Story. Both of them are biographies. This is how the respective writers decided to keep the titles for their studies. So what does this mean, Out of Bondage? So the Tondaman Story is the biography of the late Mr. Saunamurthy Tondaman, a former minister, and who gave the leadership to the freedom struggle of the stateless Tamils who live in states in Sri Lanka. Right? See how creative the title is. Right? Out of the Bondage is the metaphor that the writer selected to represent the whole freedom struggle. But it is all about the biography of the late Mr. Saunamurthy Tondaman. Right. So these are some examples which I am thinking of, which anybody can select and do do a study nowadays, right? The components of modern sex education in Sri Lanka, implications for consensus, because now there is a big dialogue going in different contexts, right? How do we formally provide the sex education in schools, right? There are a lot of arguments about this. We have not come to a consensus as a nation. So therefore, if somebody interested, right? So there was an issue quite recently, and one of the former governments had to uh, they established what do you call presidential commission to inquire about one of the textbooks published and issued by the government press. Government press means education publication department for the use of school children, right? So it was a big controversy took place in quite recent past. Still, we have not come to a consensus about something like this. And there are a lot of cases coming due to the cyber crimes, right? So, and I was keep on reading about the articles. There was a series of articles appeared in one of leading newspapers, Lanka Sunday Lanka. So the reporters were keep on reporting about the victims, right, from these cyber crimes, right? So when you read those cases, you can understand how these cyber crimes ruin the people's lives, right? So can select cases for a deeper understanding. So now look at something like this. Is franchising a good way of run a business? Even you can do a qualitative studies. Sorry. And these are the type, actually the sections I have extracted from the book, the biography written by T. Sabaragamuwa, and just to give you an indication about how they have organized, how the writer has organized, sorry, the contents, right? So usually in qualitative studies, you are free to name your chapters according to your interest, right? If you think that is the much better way of expressing your ideas and organizing your content, right? So you can have your chapters titled as something like this, right? So this biography consists of 13 chapters, right? So the first chapter, for example, the writer call it two interviews. So these are examples for chapter titles, right? So when you're about to write your complete report, research report, so you have to divide it into several chapters, right? But we used to give names very archaic way, right? Chapter 1 should be introduction, chapter 2 should be literature review, chapter 3 should be methodology, and so on, right? So it is not always the case, right? So you have the freedom. If you are creative enough, you can come up with something like this, okay? That's for your additional information. And this is one of autobiography. So this one is a biography written by a writer on one of former ministers, and this is an autobiography, right? So by Professor Herat Madana Bandara, who was with us sometimes back, and after he completed his academic career, he thought of writing his own experiences and he came up with his own autobiography. All right. And he used to title the chapters. Here, there are 12 chapters in this manner. Right. So, this is a very good example. Therefore, the rhetorics are different. Right. So when you write your quantitative proposal and the qualitative proposal, you have to understand that the rhetorical differences, right? Because in the rhetorics, in quantitative proposals, you have to reflect the objectivity, right? While you are free to reflect the subjectivity when you are compiling your qualitative proposals, right? So here you all see that subjectivity, right? Okay, so those are just examples. And you can start with an interesting abstract, but it is not mandatory. But if you think you can summarize all the work planned, right? And in the body, can give an introduction or background of the study, right? You can begin this section with something interesting. So it can be a poem or it can be a quote. It can be something that you have experienced, something that you have expressed. Right? Okay. Yeah. Oh, even I'm sorry. Even it can be a lyrics or something like that, or even it can be an image, right? Right? With a caption, interesting caption, right? So the choice is yours, right? So nobody can dictate terms in this case, right? So enjoy that freedom you have being a qualitative research and provide something interesting and useful. Also try to maintain the curiosity of the reader by placing your question in an interesting manner. Your question here is your problem, right? And tell why there is a need for the study, right? Describe the intended audience of your study. Describe your research product. What form will it take? For example, it can be a case study, ethnography, can be a documentary, can be a script of a movie, for a drama, right? It can be lyrics, right? So it can be any form of. And also you can provide a conclusion about an overview of your proposal. And then write about the research paradigm. I forgot to mention that this section is also important in your quantitative proposals, right? So you can include this there as well, right? And then use specific language to name and describe your research paradigm, right? So I know you have completed all these areas, and there are comparative paradigms. You know, when you select this most suitable paradigm for undertaking your research, so you have to give a comparative view on your selected paradigm, right? So you need to have a good comparative understanding about different research paradigms here. And then once you select your particular research paradigm, there you need to explain about or describe about the philosophical correlates, right? And assumptions of your research paradigm, right? The assumptions, overall objectives, assumptions about the nature of the knowledge, the reality, right? Major task of the researcher, right? Explain how they differ, right? Relationship with the respondents. That's what we call epistemology. So why we need to have that type of relationship, which is informed by the particular paradigm, right? Right. So then this section will be complete. And then also you can cite the previous authors who defined your research paradigm and suggested its application to your field of study. So that is to provide a strong justification of your selection of your research paradigm, right? And also suggest the appropriate criteria for evaluating the research findings, research process, research report, adequacy of information, what measures you take in order to maintain the adequacy of information, right? And then comes the research design. Again, like you select research design when you're undertaking a quantitative study. Here in the basket, you have a couple of designs to select. So unlike in quantitative studies, so selection is quite straightforward, but when selecting, in some cases, I'm not saying in all cases, but in some cases, selecting a research design for your qualitative study is quite challenging, right? Quite challenging, but still you can overcome it, right? So my advice is you have five different designs here in your basket, right? So if you are struggling to select the most suitable one, it may not be the everyone's case, right? Don't worry too much, but it can be in some cases, right, where you struggle a bit to find the most suitable one. So my advice is to, here you have five designs, right? So you will be able to find the most irrelevant design first. You keep that aside. Then you have four remaining and go through the characteristics, the applications, right? And in the literature, right? So in the previous studies, right? So what they have used, right? With that understanding, you will be able to find and next most irrelevant, not the relevant, irrelevant type of study. So you keep that aside. Now you have three, right? So if you repeatedly do the same thing, right? So you will be finally able to find this most suitable design, right? But when you say narrative designs, there are a number of narrative design under that, right? So like the biographies, autobiographies, autoethnographies, right? Oral histories, life histories. They are different from one to another, right? And why this is quite challenging when it comes to select uh, research design in a qualitative study is that their characteristics are overlapping with each other. But still, there are certain specific characteristics which you can use here to select the design. When you say case study, for example, why it is not an ethnography? If it is an ethnography, why it is not a case study, right? So this question you have to answer. Why it is not a grounded theory study, right? Why it is a narrative? Why it is a life history? Why it is not a case study? Why it is not something else, right? So this question you have to answer at this particular stage. Okay, so you can cite the literature, right? Cite from the major authors who have described your research method, right? Explain everything in detail, right? So this is relevant to all three different types of approaches, right? Students, they think that subtle things are not important, so they leave them, right? So they do report everything in your document, especially when you are undertaking a qualitative study, right? So whatever the experience you have come across, right, when you implementing your research, right, from right beginning until the end, right? So report everything in detail, right? So what we are expecting at the end as a research report is a detailed account, right? So the detailed account contribute to the quality aspect of your study, which we come to discuss next, right? So then, as you do in the quantitative study, right? So you have to talk about the who are your informants, right? Respondents, how you are going to gain access to the research sites and the respondents, how you're going to consider protect the ethical rights of the respondents, what kind of relationship you are going to establish with the respondents, and the type of data collection tools, right? Methods and procedures, data analysis and interpretation. So all these information you have to include in your document at this stage, right? And there's another important aspect you have to take into account also in the methodology section. I forgot to mention at the beginning. In quantitative studies, you have to also describe how you're going to establish reliability and validity aspects. So in qualitative studies, we call uh, there are alternative techniques, right? Because in qualitative studies, we are dealing with qualitative data, unlike quantitative data, where the quantitative researchers, they have the statistical measures to establish validity and reliability. The alternatively, qualitative researchers, they have developed alternative measures in general, what we call trustworthiness. So take a snapshot view. I'm not going to talk in detail. So if you undertake a quantitative study, these aspects you need to take into account in order to establish the quality aspect of your research: validity, reliability, generalizability, and objectivity. And when you come to qualitative studies, these are the corresponding aspects. So validity in quantitative studies, we call it credibility, and reliability, dependability, generalizability, transferability, objectivity, conformability. So these four aspects, there are a number of techniques, measures you to select. I'm not saying that you need to employ everything, but go through them to read and understand and apply them consciously in order to establish these quality aspects in your qualitative study. So at the very beginning, you have to decide this, right? So it's not after collecting and analyzing data, after at the time of compiling your report. So therefore, at the time of developing your research proposal, in both cases, in quantitative and qualitative proposals, you have to address this at the very beginning. And then you can explain if there are any preliminary biases, suppositions, and assumptions or prepositions. Because you are approaching a qualitative study, in most cases, qualitative researchers, they come with a very comprehensive and extensive research background in the same field of study. And also by referring to the literature, they may be able to develop some rudimentary working ideas. So these rudimentary working ideas we express in the form of suppositions or propositions. It doesn't mean that if you are doing a qualitative research, you are must to provide propositions. No, it's not the idea here. But because propositions are temporary declarations about the relationship between the constructs. We are not certain. That's why they are called temporary or conjectural, right? So these relationships, we are not certain. That's why we are approaching the study through the qualitative approach, right? Okay, and this is also important. Describe your previous experience and its influence. As a researcher, if you are doing a qualitative study, right, so you have to describe who you are, your previous research experience. in the account, I mean in the research report, you have to tell about yourself, right? So you are free to do that, right? So that information is important for the reader or the examiner to understand and value your content you include in the report, right? So they read the findings of the research, your interpretations of the research with the understanding of your personal background in terms of your previous experience. So they want to know how they're going to influence in the study, right? So this is we call axiological stance of research, right? In quantitative research, we call, in terms of axiology, they are value free, right? In terms of axiological perspective, qualitative research are value laden. So that means if the researcher become parts, when the researcher become parts and partial of the research context and having so much experience similar to the experience of the research respondents, right? And according to the ontological perspective that has been established at the very beginning by the research, qualitative researchers, they have the freedom to add something in what they call value to their research findings. So that freedom is there. You can use it in order to enhance the quality of your findings. So if there is a possibility of describing anticipated findings, that's fine. You can write, but it's not a must, right? And what is important here is how you establish the procedure to remain open to unexpected information. Because we approach a research project using qualitative methodology, because there are a lot of gray areas, right? We are not certain, right? So therefore, what is important here is that we need to remain open, right? So if you deal with something we are not certain, there may be a lot of possibilities that we can experience something unexpected, right? So we need to take them into account, right? So this is how we develop the social reality, or how we try to understand the social reality, which is socially constructed, right? And as we described before, we can put the information about description about the limitations and delimitations. Okay, right. And then potential ethical issues, we discussed that, how you're going to get the ethical clearance. As usual, you have to keep the your references and appendices, right? So in appendices, you can provide instruments such as interview protocols, diagrams, timelines, budget, summary of major content of each chapter. So whatever you think important to provide with the main part of the document, so you are free to include that information. Okay, right. So I think you have now realized there are so many similarities, yet there are some differences which are very unique to each approach, where you need to address specifically, right? So in that case, you need to understand the nature of these studies, right? So quantitative studies are objective in nature, qualitative studies are subjective in nature. Okay. Okay, so take a quick look at this slide, because we are very limited time. I think yeah, we're supposed to stop at 8:30, I think, right? So this is the comparison difference between the quantitative and qualitative research problem, right? So close-ended, open-ended, you know that, right? Specific in nature, general in nature. A static, that is problems do not change as data is collected and reflected upon an existing phenomenon, right? So they are very fixed, right? So if you are still struggling with some gray areas, you cannot undertake a quantitative study successfully, right? So you have to remove those gray areas and you have to keep things fixed here, right, before moving. But when it compared to quantitative studies, in qualitative studies, they are evolving, right? So every step, there's a process of back and forth, right? That is, the problems changes as data is collected, right? And reflected upon foreshadowed problems, emerging and reformulated questions, right? So now you can understand even the problem you have identified for undertaking a qualitative study can change when you move on, right? So your questions can revise, right? So when you getting more and more experienced with the research process, when the data come in, you start analyzing, right? So collecting and analyzing data in a qualitative study is more like a zigzag process, right? So therefore, there is a much room for revising your problem and questions and so on, right? Objective with respect to what will be learned and subject with respect to what will be learned. So that's we discuss. And outcome oriented. The outcome is easy to understand and describe, but in qualitative research, it's not that easy to describe the expected outcome, right? And the predictions are possible with quantitative studies, but no specific predictions are possible. The use of variables is very clear. We know exactly how many variables are there, number one. And number two condition is we know for sure the relationship between those variables. But when it comes to the qualitative studies, we are not sure about the number of variables involved. Therefore, we are not sure about the relationship between those variables. So therefore, this arises due to complexity in identifying variables, right? So I would like to give you some information about the research process. When you define your research problem, I always ask my students, what do you do next, right? So they come up with so many different answers, but I want my students to go through the research problem in detail in a very conscious manner in order to understand the nature of the research problem, right? So by understanding the nature of the research problem, we will be able to understand the variables involved and the relationship between the variables. If you are clear about it, there is no question of undertaking that study under the quantitative mode of inquiry. But in the case where we do not in a situation to define or describe the variables involved and as well as the relationship between those variables, due to the complexity of identifying variables, the better approach is to undertake the study using qualitative mode of inquiry. Right. So with that understanding, now we are moving on to the mixed mode inquiries, how you're going to develop your proposal, right? So now we have the experience of both approaches, and we now know clearly what are the similarities and what are the differences in proposals under quantitative and qualitative mode of inquiry. So, okay, now let's come to mixed methods inquiries. First, the title of the study. Some examples: psychological well-being on entrepreneurial engagement of military entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka, a mixed method study. So this is a study. I'm sorry, I could not remember the name of the student who did this study. The student is from Uwavellasa University. When I was delivering a lecture there, she came to me there and discussed her study. And then I picked this title, and it's very interesting study. I used this as an example, right? Okay. Now take another one. When I was in an interview panel for selecting candidates for a scholarship scheme, right? So I got this title from a proposal submitted by one of the candidates. So she was talking about perceived stresses, stress and allostatic load index among oncology nurses in Apeksha Hospital, Sri Lanka, a mixed methodological study, right? Okay, so what do you think? What is the difference here you find in the title? So in both titles, it is important, and even in the literature about mixed method research methodologies, most of the writers, they advise to include include the type of the study, right? So that's why you find in the second part of the title, the both researchers, they have put the phrase like a mixed method study, a mixed methodological study. So either way you can use, doesn't matter. Then the reader from the title itself can capture the can understand what kind of a study is this, because this type of studies are relatively new. It is good that you give a very clear indication at the very beginning to the reader comprehensively to make the mind set for a mixed method study, right? Okay, then we have to present the research problem, right? It can be it's problem you find maybe from reviewing the literature, or maybe through your empirical observations, right? Etc. Etc. Right? And then you better write about the purpose of the study aim and the reasons or rationale for a mixed method study. And this S is always important, right? Some students, when they write, they drop this S, right? So there is no something called mixed method, right? Always it should be methods, right? Because we are mixing two different methods, okay? And then the research questions and or hypothesis, because you have a quantitative part, you can have hypothesis as well, right? And then in the research questions, you need to have quantitative questions or hypothesis, qualitative questions, and mixed methods question, right? So if I say that in again, you need to have at least one quantitative question, at least one qualitative question, at least one mixed method question. Okay. Example. What results emerge from comparing the exploratory qualitative data about boys' self-esteem with outcome quantitative instrument data measured on a self-esteem instrument? So this is what kind of a question is this? Is this a quantitative question? Is this a qualitative question or a mixed method question? So this is an example for a mixed method question, right? So there are three ways of writing mixed method question according to Chris Wells. He says you can write in the form of if you can focus on the content, right? So you can have a content mixed method question, you can have a methodological mixed method question, and you can have hybrid type mixed method question. So meaning of hybrid type mixed method question is a combination of both and methodological question, right? So this example is an example for a hybrid type mixed method question, right? So please remember, if you want to claim that your study is a mixed method study, you need to have at least one quantitative question, one qualitative question, and a mixed method question. So when you're presenting your mixed method question, I repeat, you can have it in 3 different ways, right? Content, methodology, and the hybrid type. And then explain or describe your philosophical foundation for using mixed method research, because this is going to be different from the philosophical foundations of quantitative and qualitative research, right? So you have learned such philosophical foundations, right? And then the literature review, you can have both quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method studies. You can borrow literature from those studies and combine in your literature, right? And then the design and the method. So you can give a definition of a mixed method research, right? If the reader is novel or new to mixed method research, it's a good support that we are giving to the reader to understand the nature of the mixed method research, right? So if you think that your audience or the reader is well conversed with this particular method, it is not a requirement. But if you do not know who is going to read this, better you include a definition about mixed method research. And then the particular design that you need to select here, there are few designs. Actually, there are so many designs being used by mixed method researchers. In a one study conducted by Tashakori and Tashakori, who conducted a structured literature review in order to find researchers who have conducted their research using mixed method designs. They were able to find more than 40 different designs. Fortunately, James Criswell reduced that number to 6. And in your basket, here you have 6 different designs to choose from. So my advice is, again, you can think of first 3, which are very straightforward to apply. If you have very specific needs, so then you can think of the other last 3 design types. For example, convergent parallel, exploratory sequential, exploratory sequential. So those 3 designs are more than enough if you are a novice to mixed method research to undertake your research. But if you have specific need, multi-phase mixed method designs, usually we are using for longitudinal studies. May not be your case, so therefore you can omit that. But in other designs, out of other 5 designs, first 3 are easy to understand and apply, right? And it will more than sufficient to undertake your first mixed method study. Okay, so I have a question for you. If I go back to these 2 titles, right? So what is your suggestion? What is the best mixed method design you would like to suggest to undertake these 2 studies? I hope you can at least you can interact, right? I hope you can interact, right? If not, you can text. I would like to give a present if you can try, because you have just completed your discussion on different research designs, right? Any volunteers, please? What is the okay? So when you look at these two titles, you can understand something that I think there's an answer. Let's see. Oh, okay, they cannot talk. Anyway, right? Okay, right. Sorry for that. I didn't know about it. Okay, so I'll explain. So then, so you can have you can consider two designs here, right? So choice is yours. You can think of conducting these two studies under the design of convergent parallel or explanatory sequential mixed method designs, right? So convergent parallel means you give equal emphasis to both phases, both quantitative and qualitative phases. You equally collect both quantitative and qualitative data, and then you come up with the results and bring that results into the interpretation, right? So equal emphasis, right? And if you apply the design of explanatory sequential mix method, why? Because you have a strong quantitative background in studying these constructs. Variables are clearly identified, and there are models already established in studying these areas of field of studies. All right. So now I think you have quite good understanding about selection of these designs, right? Okay, so in explanatory sequential and exploratory sequentials, you give different emphasis to different phases, right? And then one phase is either followed by, or the one phase is either built upon, right? So depending on your requirement, you can select that. So if your your quantitative background is not your experience, but if if your study quantitative background approach is not that sound, then you can start with the qualitative pace, right? So where you can employ exploratory sequential mix method. And with that experience and understanding, you will be able to refine the instruments that you are going to use in the subsequent quantitative phase. So likewise, you can discuss with your supervisor when it comes to select your research design in either type of research approach. So the challenge here is actually there are so many options, you have to select the most suitable one. Be cautious and conscious when you may come to make these decisions, right? And then you can write about the challenges in using this design and how they will be addressed, right? So this must be relevant. This information must be relevant to the particular design that you are going to use, right? And then you can provide the examples of the use of the type of design with the literature support. That's usually what you do. And it is very important in most cases, writers advise for the researchers to include a diagram of procedures, right? So you can present this information in a form of a flow diagram. Then the reader who read the content will easily understand when they go through the diagrams as well, right? So therefore, and even it is good for a qualitative study or quantitative study, right? So you provide a procedure about the design and the procedure about the methodology uh, in order to enhance the understanding of the reader, rather than just providing the information only with uh, the in the form of text, right? And then you have to separately deal with provide the information about the quantitative data collection and analysis and qualitative data collection and analysis, right? Because in mixed methods studies, you have two phases, as I mentioned before, quantitative phase. So therefore, you have to talk about how you are going to collect quantitative data and how you're going to analyze. And also, similarly, how you're going to collect qualitative data and how you are going to analyze them. And then the mixed methods data interpretation procedure. So how you're going to mix the results of both analysis and how you're going to do that in the interpretations, right? So write about the procedures there. And then the validity and reliability approaches in quantitative research. We have because we have two phases, one representing quantitative, the other one representing qualitative. So therefore, you have to address the quality aspect in terms of both validity and reliability, that is for the quantitative phase, and then the rigor or trustworthiness. We have credibility, conformability, transferability, and credibility, conformability, transferability, and dependability, right? So those four aspects you have to consider, and how you are going to establish, apply those measures, you have to write in detail, right? And it is very important because this is something you cannot miss at the very beginning. If you miss, you have no time to address them in the later stage of the research process, right? It is same to other two approaches as well, right? But we see very limited attention. Oh, students are very negligible when they come to address these section, right? So it's a very important, and you have to be honest, right? Especially when you do a qualitative study, if you do not apply anything, don't write about it for the sake of just providing information in this section, right? Okay, so you can talk about the researchers' resources, skills, your background, conduct to mixed method studies, right? So you need different skills, right? Because unlike you are conducting a quantitative study, unlike you are conducting a qualitative study, right? You need skills of, say, collecting data, both quantitative and qualitative, and analyzing data, both quantitative and qualitative, right? So therefore, you need to list out the resources you need and the skills you need to have or to be developed for undertaking. Because when you start working on a mixed method research project, your skills in quantitative studies, conducting quantitative studies, comparatively good to conducting a qualitative study, right? So then you need to understand which areas you need to improve to complete a mixed method study quite confidently, right? And potential ethical issues, as usual, we discussed that. References, we discuss it. Appendices, instruments, protocol, diagrams, right? So the budget, timelines, anything you think important, you can include here. So your instruments, you need to have your instruments for quantitative data collection and protocols such as interview protocols and protocols for if you are going to conduct, say, unstructured uh, focus group, for example, right? Uh, Better you ready with those things when at the time of your proposal submission, right? So then the examiners, when you submit it for proposal defense, examiners will also have a chance to go through them, and they will provide necessary input to further develop if there is any necessity to do so, right? So therefore, to make your proposal comprehensive, right? So uh, include as much as possible information relevant to make your structure complete and comprehensive. Right? Okay, so finally, I have added here some of the criteria we use to judge research proposals, right? So that is also important to know, because when you are writing your research proposals, you need to know the criteria that usually in academia we take into account for making comparative judgments, right? I will read quickly. Clear, rational, persuasive, and detailed, supported by sound scholarship and evidence from literature, significant literature in the area considered, address a topic that is current, salient, and significant, coherent design, and well organized. So this is very important. When you select a design, the rest of all the steps and activities must be coherent, right? When you say something at the beginning, but in the latter part, it's something different, right? So then you face serious problems, right? At the time of the vibe or even in between, right? So you don't move forward unless you clear all the gray areas, right? So that's important. Okay. An approach method which is appropriate to the research, the governance, ethical issues, right? Properly it should be addressed. Critically reviewed and edited your own writing. Seek others' help for this, right? So don't think that you have to do everything by your own. Your supervisor is there, your colleagues are there, maybe you can add access to other academics in the same faculty, in the same department, or in another university. It doesn't matter, right? So wherever you think you can get help, use it, right? And even now we have language editing softwares, right, in order to improve your language presentation, right? So use them, right? And then also provide everything with a suitable structure, style, organization, adapt all the academic conventions when and where you need to adapt, right? And present your proposal in a very professional manner, right? So have less problems always, right? So if you provide a comprehensive, complete proposals, right? So your supervisor will give the green light as soon as possible to go ahead with your implementation of the proposals. That's what we need, right? So therefore, please remember, right, when you have to decide to go with the same proposal, right? So I would like to repeat that, right? So you have to cross-check whether you have the complete access to the data, to the research site, to the respondents, right? If you have still not cleared those things, right? So don't develop your proposal further. Don't go to your research defense, no use, right? So therefore, at the very early stage, right after you define your problem and decide your objectives and all, right? So then you are in a position to understand what are the necessary uh, data sources you have to deal with. So then you will be able to understand your research site and the respondents, and make sure, because they are beyond your control, right? So maybe you can have either official or for personal access, doesn't matter. You can use both in case, doesn't matter. But make sure that you have the green light from in those individuals as well as those institutions to collect, gather the relevant data, right? Okay, and this, I hope this is the last slide. While you're doing all these things, you have to manage yourself, right? So if you read through these boxes, you can understand you are not alone, right? There are so many resources around you. There are so many individuals who would like to help you, right? So therefore, what you need is from your side, you need to be focused and committed, determined, and you need to maintain your self-discipline. You have to be very well organized. And in this case, I always advise my students to never throw their draft documents, right, until they complete their research project and get through, right? So most of the things, sometimes you have to refer back. They were completely lost if you throw those draft papers, right? So therefore, you can keep everything in a folder until you keep your research project completely done, right? So then you can throw them, discard them completely, right? And also, you know that how students facing difficulties when protecting their electronic data, right? So we are working with machines, anything can happen anytime. So therefore have your backups all the time, and not unlike good old days, right? So you have so many ways of keeping your backups in well, in position well, right? And then get help, right? Always look around, right? So you have a good library, you have a good panel of academics, you have good supervisors, and you have seniors who have got this experience before, right? Talk to them, right? Every time, talk to them, right? If you talk to your supervisor, the supervisor will talk, right? If you don't talk, the supervisor will also not talk, right? Because he or she doesn't have nothing to talk, right? So then you cannot clear up your questions, your gray areas, right? In the process, right? Get experienced, right? When you become more and more experienced, right? So why you are more stressed? Because you are not focused on developing your skills. When you are more skillful, the things will come in an easy way, right? So thank you very much. I hope I have done something interesting, maybe not new, but maybe you might think something important at this stage. If so, I'm also happy sharing my experiences. If I missed anything, that's why there can be a lot of things I missed. You can discuss with your supervisors and lecturers at any time. I know that they are freely available and easy to access. And wish you all the very best for your research endeavor, and hope everyone get their projects done on time and get through the examination well. Thank you. Okay, so if you have questions, I don't know whether they are allowed to talk or not, but if you have questions, maybe. Okay,
Sir?
there are a few questions there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sir, can you hear
There are a
me?
few- yes, Shant, I can hear you.
Thank you first of all, thank you very much for delivering such an informative as well as very insightful session, sir. It's wonderful. So as you can see, sir, there are three questions here. raised by one of participants for today's session. Shall I read it for you, sir?
Sure.
The first thing,
Please.
can we use qualitative mode of inquiry to explore the truths that are well established as variables or indicators in existing literature?
Well, can we use qualitative mode of inquiry to
Explore the truths.
truths?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Clear answer is yes, because it's the idea of methodological innovativeness, because it has been very well established, right? So you can test it with another methodological approach. There is no any harm doing that.
Okay, sir. So the
Because
second question.
theories are, Shanika, if I had, sorry,
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Theories are explaining the generalized behavior of phenomenon, right? So they are they are actually the generalized behavior of phenomenon, right? So in deductive process, in qualitative studies, we follow the deductive approach, right? So in deductive approach, we move from specific to general, right? In qualitative inductive approach, we move from specific to we move from specific. We move from uh, general to specific, right? That is the difference. So therefore, you can see whether the theory is completely comprehensively explaining the behavior of a phenomenon, or whether there are some other variables involved as not been explained by the existing theories. Right? So nothing is fixed here, right? So there is another question. I think I can read it from the
Q&A option, sir.
Q&A. Yes.
Yeah.
Why can't we have a conceptualization in the initial process of qualitative research? Okay, so there is no hard and fast rule here, uh, because in most cases in qualitative research, why we have to undertake a qualitative approach? That is because of the uncertainty, because of the complexity of the variables. Why the complexity arises? Complexity arises due to two reasons. The first reason is we are not sure about how many variables involved, right? So that lead to another confusion, because if we do not know how many variables are involved, therefore we are not in a position to explain the relationship between those variables. Those two conditions make the complexity of the research problem. Okay, so therefore it is not possible, as we do in quantitative studies, to conceptualize the problem in the early research process, because conceptualization usually takes place in the latter part of the qualitative process. So that if you refer to the inductive and deductive processes, so then you will easily understand this. But to add to that, you can have prepositions, right? So you can have prepositions, and also you can show that how those prepositions describe the relationships between the variables temporarily or conjecturally. Okay, so that indicates the researcher at the early stage, he or she has some understanding about how the variables would behave, but it's not certain. It is not fully supported by existing theories. So therefore, the conceptualization is quite not possible in the initial qualitative process. We can work with rudimentary working ideas, right? But more clearly conceptualization, and it is very importantly conceptualization will take place in the latter part. Actually, after the analysis of the data in a qualitative study, if I precisely tell. So that's if you don't do a conceptualization there, that's a big part is missing from your qualitative research. Okay, the third one, I have heard some cases that the research onion is regarded as the conceptualization in qualitative research. Can that research onion talks about something else. I don't know where you have heard about it, but okay, try to understand this. The conceptualization take place in quantitative studies at the early stage. That's why you as supervisors, you ask from the students to bring that information, that piece of information in the proposal if they are conducting quantitative studies. But when our students are doing qualitative studies, we are not very much stressing them to bring that piece of information because it's not really necessary and relevant at this stage. Okay. Hope I have answered all three questions. Okay, if I go back to the first question, even if there are literature very well established about describing the variables involved in a behavior of a phenomenon, as explained by the very well established theories, still there are possibilities of conducting the same research in other mode of inquiries, because if you can do a mixed method study after this, right? Because you can do a explanatory sequential mixed method study. That is to further validate the results, right? By adding different types of data and results from different type of data to your quantitative results, right? Shanika, I hope I have answered the question. If you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer.
Sir, only 3 questions are there. So, yes, you answered for those all.
Okay, then thank you very much for your kind invitation to deliver this lecture today. I really enjoyed. Hope you have learned something interesting. And I am happy to share my presentation. The organizers can distribute it to the students.
Sure, sir. We will do it.
Good night.
Okay, sir. There's a rest of the formalities of the session. So please be waited here, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, the distinguished guests and the respected audience. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of the Department of Accountancy and Finance, Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka, for the successful completion of the 6th session of the Thesis Mastering Program 2025. First and foremost, I extend a very hearty vote of thanks to the main speaker of the today's session, Professor Iraj Rathnayake from Department of Tourism Management, Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. Sir, it was indeed an inspiring and enlightening session. At the outset, I would also like to express my profound gratitude to the Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka, headed by Professor Atul Nyanapala. Further, I would like to express my special gratitude to Professor T.Y. Piris, Head Department of Accountancy and Finance, Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. His visionary approach and dedication played a pivotal role in initiating this kind of a program. I would also like to express our sense of obligation to Professor Jayanten Devasiri, the main coordinator of this program, for his unconditional support. Also, I am truly grateful for the organizing committee, Ms. Shanika Rathnasiri, Ms. Lakmini Valakumbura, Ms. Madhusha Amarasena, Ms. Rashmina Ahodhya, and Mr. Dakshina Patamedi, who meticulously planned and executed every aspect of this thesis mastering program. Finally, I would like to sincerely thank the audience, including academics, researchers, and research students for their active participation. Hope you all will join us with the TMP session 7, that is on the best practices in data collection and validation for quantitative research. It is done by Professor Dr. Prisangika Pereira, Department of Business Management, Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. Once again, thank you very much and have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you.